Hi there, and thank you for tuning in. I have here the little Ricoh GR3x. It's a camera primarily made for street, I think, but I have also used it for landscape and architecture. In this video, I want to talk about my experience with this camera. I bought it a long time ago, and I haven't actually been shooting with it. Only recently, the last 2 or 3 weeks, I have picked up this camera, and I just want to tell you, what are my first impressions shooting with it. So it's not going to be a full review. I think that takes a very long video, and there are tons of review out there. But I just want to share my experience with this camera while it's fresh in memory. So maybe this can be input for your decision as to which camera you want to go for. First, the image quality. And I must say, I am blown away is perhaps a strong wording, but I am really impressed. In part because when I look at this small camera, I'm sort of convinced that if you want to have good image quality, you need to have a big camera and a big lens and full frame and whatnot. But this little camera actually is right up there with my Nikon Z6 Mark II. The color rendition, the sharpness, the micro contrast, everything is, I wouldn't say from top shelf, because of course you can get better cameras, but it's really, really good. Maybe it's in part because it is such a small camera that I keep thinking you can't get good images out of something so small, but you actually can. Of course you can sit and pixel peep and find errors and whatnot, but my main takeaway from shooting with this camera is that the image quality is simply amazing. When I got the camera, I did a review of the image quality. The images shown here are samples from that review. And you can follow the link in case you want to have more details. Another thing I have noticed is that when I shoot with my Nikons, I tweak both white balance and exposure a lot in post. With this little camera, what comes out of this little camera, I shoot in RAW. I find that if I tweak the exposure or the white balance, I actually don't like it, so to speak. What comes out of this camera is the way I want it, straight out of camera, which is a bit new to me. So the Nikons, of course, I love my Nikons, don't get me wrong, but I'm really impressed by the way, the camera settings somehow deliver white balance and exposure spot on, at least according to my personal preferences. I can't, of course, guarantee it will fit you. I haven't done nothing, exceptional. The white balance is auto white balance, and the exposure is, I can't even recall, but nothing advanced going on here. I don't know how to do it, but that's something I have definitely noticed. As you probably know, that Ricoh is born with a prime lens, and you can't change it. So you have to work with what you got here, one lens and one lens only. I must admit, this is probably where I have struggled the most. I'm used to zoom lenses, or at least being able to put on a longer lens than this one. What I have found though is that you can crop. There's plenty of pixels to crop. So if you want to zoom in, you can zoom in. You can crop away some of the parts that you don't want in the frame, and that works fine. I will say again, that's probably where I struggle the most with this little camera. In terms of autofocus, I will say I'm still learning. I haven't found the final settings that I want to go for. But what I have found is that this is a pretty advanced camera. You have so many options, and there are videos out there that explain all the options that you have. So I was actually surprised when you dive into the menus, how many options you have available and how technical this camera actually is. I was also surprised how many versions that Ricoh push out of the firmware. I think I was something like 30 versions behind. I was at 114 and I jumped to 141 or something in that range. So keep up with the firmware updates. Some of the changes they have done is actually to the autofocus, but I haven't concluded anything on the autofocus yet, so I can't share that with you yet. But I have noticed that, man, there's a lot of options available. In terms of ergonomics and shooting experience, I will say that normally I have fairly big hands, so normally I prefer large cameras with deep grips and all that. This camera is so light that it's not an issue. you can easily shoot with this, even though you have big hands and you're used to big cameras. I have had no learning curve or getting used to this camera at all. It's very, very easy to work with. I will also say there's no viewfinder, as you probably already know. There's a screen here on the back. But I think most of us who are used to I shoot with my iPhone constantly, it's exactly the same experience. That's not a biggie for me, but of course you have to get used to the fact that there's no viewfinder. The camera is not weather sealed, and I see a lot of complaints about that. I don't baby my gear, and this camera so far has survived the Frederick treatment. But I've lost this ring that there is around the camera, but otherwise I haven't noticed anything. I have no dust on the sensor or things like that. But I must also say I don't take this camera out in heavy rain or bad weather. So be aware that the weather sealing apparently leaves something to be desired. As much as I love this little camera, there's one thing I would complain about, and that's the battery life. It's not impressive, to say the least. I was out shooting this morning, and I think it lasted less than an hour and 80 images. I often leave the camera on because, when you do street photography, you have to be ready when the moment is there. So you can't fiddle with the camera and turn it on and wait for the lens to be pushed out and all that. You need to be there. So I often walk with the camera turned on. And of course, that is bad news for such a small battery here. But it runs flat really fast. So my recommendation would be, if you buy this camera, get some extra batteries. Otherwise, you need to have a USB-C battery pack to recharge it on the go. Speaking of USB-C, you can charge this camera via USB-C, and I love it. I must say, when I look at my old cameras, my old Nikons, I love my cameras, don't get me wrong, but I hate the chargers. I think old Nikon cameras, there was a charger with every camera, and I have a whole drawer full of chargers. So I cannot recommend USB-C and charging via USB-C enough. And I'm happy to see this little camera, of course, has a USB-C port. Wonderful little detail. Maybe to some extent that can counter for the fact that the battery life leaves something to be desired. I have shot both street, landscape and architecture with this little camera, and I think it does just fine. So maybe it could also work for you. Thank you for watching. As always, happy shooting. Take care. Bye-bye.